What separates organizations that are simply surviving versus those that are truly thriving? The answer often lies in the quality of organizational culture. Ask yourself, how are you engaging with your people? How are you treating them? And how is it being received? Well, if you're an organizational leader that needs some assistance in sharpening and strengthening your answers to those very questions, today you're in luck. Because in this episode of Let's Have This Conversation, I sit down with my friend Billy Bonaparte. He is a cultural alignment and an employee engagement expert. We explore why organizational culture should be much more than an HR initiative. It's one of the most powerful strategic advantages an organization or a business can possess. With more than 15 years of experience assisting Fortune 500 organizations realign their culture, accelerating growth through talent and innovation, and human and high performance, Billy shares how leaders can create cultures where purpose, performance, and belonging work together and collaborate to drive sustainable success. The conversation centers around and examines the critical role that cultural alignment can play in ensuring employee values, behaviors, and beliefs are connected to an organization's mission and vision. We're also discussing what clear organizational priorities, helping businesses focus their people, resources, and energy where it matters the most. Throughout our conversation, Bonaparte explains how effective leadership, authentic communication, and intentional employee engagement can create workplaces where people feel valued, trusted, and empowered to contribute at the highest of levels rather than treating culture as a standalone initiative. He demonstrates why today's most successful organizations embody culture into every business decision, leadership, conversation, and strategic objective. Whether you're a CEO, HR, people executive and leader, talent relations manager, or an entrepreneur, or simply someone interested in building high-performing and results-driven teams, this episode offers practical insights on creating transformative workplaces where performance and people flourish together. And Bonaparte, join me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShan. Let's have this conversation. Hey, Billy, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program on this Friday, my friend. It's great to see you once again, and happy Friday to you.
Yeah, happy Friday to you as well, Kevin. I'm excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation together.
Absolutely. So, Billy, I know that you've dedicated your career looking at the intersection of talent management and innovation, my friend, with a sprinkle of diversity sprinkled in. So tell me about why talent development and innovation are so important to you, my friend.
Yeah, thanks. And it's a great question to start off with. I think it just starts with recognizing that, like, I always have felt like work is always going to get done. However, the caliber of work that we get done largely hinges on the environments that we work in. And so I always think it's important to make sure that we're cultivating nice, strong, like healthy environments for people to perform in. And if you were to ask me, like, what makes up a healthy environment? I think it starts with accountability, like making sure that we're hiring people who are first and foremost accountable to themselves, people that we know are going to be accountable to the results that they're asked to drive. Are they accountable to their teammates? Are they also accountable to the company as well? So that's the first thing I think that makes up a really strong environment. The second thing that I believe makes up a really great environment is this notion of trust. I deeply believe that all of us have unique talents and traits that we bring to the table, and I think that we need to make sure that as leaders that we're creating space for people to offer those talents in a really impactful way. The last two that I believe make up a really great environment is going to be gratitude. Gratitude is huge. How do you show appreciation for people? How do you celebrate their work to make sure they feel like they're belonging, that they belong, and that they're seen as well? And then lastly, the thing that makes up a really great environment is acceptance. You heard me talk about this notion of like we all bring really great skills and traits to the table, but we also all work a little bit differently too. And I think it's important that we seek to understand what makes people tick. I don't think we need to make sure that I think there's always coaching opportunities, but the core of people we should not be trying to change. We all work a little bit differently. And so it starts with acceptance. And as leaders, I think it's important that we are mindful of like what are we awarding and what are we tolerating, because I think that emits a general energy across the team. So I would just ask people and encourage folks who are in leadership positions to be mindful of the things that we tolerate and the things that we award. But yeah, environments matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk to you about human performance and investing in people because when I talk to organizations, the first thing I tell them is that their best asset they'll ever invest in is their people. So how do you think human performance, behavior, and the investment in the person itself can contribute to a thriving organizational culture? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I think about we invest our time, we invest our energy, and we invest in things that like matter to us. So we can think about like on a personal level, like for example, I'm a car guy, so I'm gonna take care of my car. I'm gonna make sure that it's got the right oil in it, that the tires are pumped up. I'm gonna go take it to get cleaned out after my dog and I go on a camping trip, and so all those things. And what I'm saying to myself is that this car like matters to me. And so we think about like individuals in general. How are we spending time to make sure that people know that they matter and that we care about them? That could be simple things as I have a one-on-one consistently with you. It could be something as like I want to bring you into a meeting that maybe you normally wouldn't sit at. It could be something as me like delegating, getting out of the way and saying, "Hey, like I think this is an opportunity that bodes well for your talents," and letting people like exercise their talents in a really great way. But like it's pretty simple. Like you can tell like what you care about by where you give your time, your attention, and where you pour your resources into. And I have this like sneaky like inkling feeling that like everybody wants to know that they matter in spaces. And as leaders, I think we have a unique opportunity to pour into people and demonstrate that they matter to us and that we care genuinely about them. And on the other side of that, what I strongly believe happens is that every business is existing to solve a problem. And so, we solve problems that excite us. We solve problems that we care about, things that matter to us. And think about those three things: things that excite us, things that matter to us, things that we care about. I would strongly argue that every associate wants to feel the same way. They want to know that a company is excited to have them. They want to know that they care about them to the degree in which they can on a personal level, but also on a personal level. And they want to know that they matter. What we know about businesses too is that they're going to encounter trials and tribulations. And when businesses encounter trials and tribulations, those individuals who feel like they matter, that people that they know that they belong, are going to be steadfast in these storms. And as you know, like during storms, that's usually what propels a company forward. You've got to go through things, and you want to make sure that you have people surrounding you who know that they matter to the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And Billy, as you know, I have cerebral palsy, and I live my life through the three E's each and every day. But these are my three non-negotiables. It's energy, effort, and enthusiasm, my friend. And I'm curious to bring that to an HR perspective because you're interested also in making sure that culture and developing and promoting an inclusive one is much more than an HR initiative. So I'm curious to ask you about how can we make sure that culture is an organizational priority rather than, simply checking a box. And where do you think energy, effort, and enthusiasm comes in, my friend?
Yeah, I really love your three E's there, and I think if there was just a blank slate of like what do I need to be as a leader, I would write those down and say this is exactly like what we need to be leading with. As you think about like culture, I just think that people are the common denominator in every situation that we walk into. And I alluded to this earlier in our conversation about, like our environments matter. And the thing that's in an environment is you and I. And so because you and I are in this, like, how are we caring for each other? How are we putting ourselves in like positions to be successful? And how are we making sure that we're bringing out the best in each other? And I often think that we can get very short sighted in our thinking because most businesses are existing to be able to, I said this earlier, to drive, to solve problems, but we're also here to drive profits as well. And a lot of times we get caught up in this thing of like, hey, like drive profits, drive profits, drive profits. But we forget about the people who are driving those things. And so when we forget about those people, it leaves us incredibly vulnerable. And I think it's very important that we make sure that like understanding what is the foundational thing here, and that is the people. And so if you get the people right, I'm a firm believer that the strategy and that the outcomes will then soon follow. But if you get the people wrong, and you heard me say this thing earlier about things being wobbly, I think that's when your boat is going to start to fall apart really quickly. You've got to make sure that you're creating a strong foundation on your team and a strong culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Bill, I want to ask you about organizational change and the role that resilience plays in that, because throughout the course of your career, you've helped executive teams navigate, significant change while turning culture into a strategic business advantage. So when we talk about a bold change and what makes that successful, how do you think organizations can go through a successful organizational change while also not compromising culture? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in acknowledging that like humanity is important in every like place that we go into. And so as you think about bold change, I think leaders have an opportunity to be vulnerable. And so what is it about change that like rally like people are, we get a little we get frazzled at times, myself included. And what's really behind change is that people fear something that they are going to lose. That's ultimately what's behind that. And I think for me as a leader, when I'm present in front of people, I think it's important that I acknowledge that, hey, like there's some uncertainty in me right now. There is something about this change that is rattling me. And I become more human to individuals. And I think that's what people want to see is a human. And as we think about like how do we lead through change, then let's start setting some expectations specifically about when. When can you start to see us moving differently, thinking differently? When can you think that you would be involved as well? And that kind of gets to my next point too. It's about the who. So who's going to be involved in this change? And I often talk about this thing around like this invitation. How do we invite our talented associates to be a part of the solution? And then lastly, it's like, how do we go about this? And so I think it's important that we let inform people about what's going to be required of you and what we need from you as well. But that's not like a one time thing that we do. That has to be on a continuous cycle. So, what is the cadence that you set to where you can continue having this conversation over and over again of ensuring that people feel like they are a part of the solution, that they understand what's going on? And I've always said this, informed associates are empowered associates. So you got to communicate your progress. You got to communicate your setbacks. You got to communicate anticipations. And then probably the biggest thing you want to make sure that you communicate is to celebrate. Celebrate where you're doing things right. And I think that creates positive reinforcement. Or that is
Yeah,
positive reinforcement.
absolutely. And Billy, you talk about organizational change, and I talk to organizations about the importance of hiring folks with disabilities because when you look at the numbers, about a quarter of people with disabilities are regularly employed compared to 68% of non-counterparts. So when we talk about organizational change, it can also be a positive when we talk about infusing folks with disabilities. So I'm curious, how do you think we can get leaders to get over sort of their attitudinal barriers and you hiring and incorporating individuals with disabilities as a net positive? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I think it starts with self awareness. And I think it starts with recognizing our own biases. And so, just like on a personal level, so if I like how I walk through my life, my lenses have been shaped by the experiences that I've lived. They've also been shaped by like the people that I've surrounded myself with. And I can get very narrow minded in my thought of thinking like, well, only people who act like me, who think like me, and have similar experience as me are going to show up in the way in which I'm thinking that this problem needs to be solved. And that is a very foolish way of which I've gone about thinking at times. And how I've tried to approach that going forward is that I don't know. And I don't know that I have the answer of solving things. And it creates this slight bit of like curiosity within me to be more open minded around how people can solve situations. One of the things I always tell people is like, there's so much beauty in traveling. And here's what I mean by that is if you go to another country, like how people define success here in the United States is drastically different from how they would define success somewhere else. But they ultimately get there. They've gone about it a different way. And I think that same mentality needs to be incorporated into our day to day work. Like, there's no one way of which we go about doing things. There's no one person that can go about doing things. We have to be open minded because there is diversity not only in how we look, but there's diversity in our experiences, there's diversity in our thoughts. And as long as we are all grounded in our why and where we're going, there are different ways in which we can go about being successful.
Yeah, and I know for you, you've been awarded awards for your approach to culture and employee engagement and retention throughout the course of your career. So, what do you think is the key to engaging employees and retaining their attention in today's modern workforce? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I've had a really like great career and I'm really proud of that career. I ultimately think that success is rooted, and you've heard me say this word often in our conversation, and it is rooted in the care for the associates. And I think that the programs that we stood up, the programs that people have had an opportunity to experience, I believe people have ultimately felt that care. Now, the thing that I think that separates us as we were driving work is it's about the associates, but it's also about how we were driving like business outcomes too. And so there was always this thing of like, if we do this, here's what we can expect from a result standpoint. And the work that we did was never about like how I felt what I feel we should do this. it was always data driven work. So whether that was qualitative or quantitative data, it was always like informed decisions that we were making. And when we did that, we were always able to point back and share with associates, like, here's how your voice is showing up in the work. And I think for us too, or I know for us too, like you have to be able to measure your performance. And so we did a really great job of being able to measure our performance. We were never stagnant in our work. The value was always demonstrated. And I think we built a lot of trust with our key stakeholders and also with our customers too, our customers being our teammates.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I want to ask you about, personally being driven or drawn to organizations where, culture isn't simply a rubber stamp or a check mark on a box, my friend. It's really an organizational priority. So how do you think you over the course of your career you've been drawn to different opportunities and positions where culture is at this forefront of developing people? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I think you it's this actions and words and I think we've seen a lot of organizations who it's really easy for us to put on our website that we care about our associates. Belonging is important to us. Equity is important to us. Like bring your whole self to work. But we've also seen when you get behind, pull the curtain behind, and you get in and you start to experience it. It's not necessarily like what actually is occurring in these environments. And I think, as I alluded to earlier, we can get really short sighted in our thoughts of like, hey, let's move forward. Like, let's just keep pushing ahead. But we forget about the people who are inside of that organization who are charged with driving those results. And so when we spend more time getting our foundational things right and an organization, I believe that's where we get it right. And I don't think it's one time deal. I think you have to continuously go back and you have to make sure that you're nurturing this environment. And like what we the whole adage of you reap what you sow. And I tell people during hard times is when you're going to really find out like what caliber of team that you have, because ultimately I think that's where character starts to come out. And so if you're not investing in your time or in your people on a consistent base, when things get really hard, I think you're going to have a hard time like navigating and working your way through those challenges.
Yeah, and just because I'm curious to get your answer based on your last answer, as executives, how do you think we can guard against, executive complacency? Because once you get in a certain level of leadership, some of your daily tasks become mundane and routine. So I'm curious, how do you think executives can guard against complacency?
Yeah, it's. I've read a study once that the more you grow in your career and you're at an executive level, the lower your emotional intelligence seems to get. And I can't sit here and say that I've experienced that with folks. It was a study that I happened to read. But what I will say to answer your question is like you have to stay on guard. And I don't think it's I think it's easy for us to get lazy and get complacent, especially when we experience some level of success, a degree of success. We think we've got it figured out, but business is always evolving. People are always evolving. Environments are always evolving. And we have to stay on top of that. One of the things that I would encourage, any executive to remember is like, know who you are, know why you're doing what you're going to do. And I think you're going to attract a certain caliber of a person or a certain person that aligns to you and your vision. And I also think it's important to begin with the end in mind. I think that like because I know like what do I want people to say about me as they end their tenure here at X company? Like how do I can start to think about that versus just like leaving that up to guess. I think
Mm-hmm.
a powerful person is a very intentional person. You and I were talking. You mentioned like non-negotiables. I think that's an important thing to be too. Of like, what are the things that like I'm not going to lay down about, and what are the things that I'm going to stand up about. And then I also think it's important that we enable like feedback in these spaces too. If you're an executive, so I think it's important to hear good things. I also think it's important to hear challenging things too.
Yeah, absolutely. So building on that last point, how do you think executives can constructively take criticism from employees in order to grow themselves. Because, there's a plaque in my office that says, the day that you stop learning is the day you die, right? So how do you think executives can take that model of taking constructive criticism from the people that are in charge of leading to become a better leader? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think there's some characteristics that you have to be able to exude. I think first and foremost, you've got to create. Are you creating a safe environment where people feel safe enough to share what they honestly feel about, things that are ongoing in the business, the pulse on the people. I think that's important to create a safe environment. I think the other thing that will short side you there is an ego. If you think that you know everything, if you think that you know what's going on and you've positioned yourself to where you don't want to receive feedback, I think you're not going to have longevity here. And so I believe that you have to be able to exercise a large degree of humility. I started one of the earlier leadership courses that I started early in my career. There was this thing that came out. It said Q-tip, and what it meant was quit taking things personally. And so when people give you feedback, um, you know that they're coming from a genuine place. You can assume positive intent that that's where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about feedback too that I tell a lot of people is, take what you need out of it. I don't believe that you have to take all of it to heart, and then also this is something that's I think we have to be very conscious of is where is that feedback coming from as well? What is the person giving you feedback grounded in? Do they truly have your best interests at heart? Do they believe directionally where this company is going? Have their behaviors and actions demonstrated that? And then you can take those things into because this is all right, this is a solid person to give me feedback. So yeah, feedback's incredible. We have to you should be creating feedback loops wherever we're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you said that one of your strengths is connecting executive vision with employee purpose by helping leaders speak to both hearts and minds, my friend, when they make leadership decisions. So, how do you use authentic storytelling and the life of people to connect executive vision with a people purpose? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, great question. One that I believe is critical in leadership, and I think we all should be doing it. This notion of storytelling, I believe it's one of the most effective tools a leader can have. And when you're telling a story, I think it's important to allow your audience to see themselves in this story. And so, how do you make it? How do you make it personable? And I think during your storytelling, I think it's okay that we emote. You've heard me talk about being human, inviting humanity into conversations. How can you offer and when you do that, I think we have a degree of empathy for people. We
Mm-hmm.
have a degree of acceptance for people as well. And so telling stories is absolutely important. If I look at my own story, I think about my prior team, and they were just extraordinary individuals, but this team also saw me they've witnessed me endure personal hardships, they witnessed me endure professional hardships, they saw me step away when I needed to step away, they saw me come back no matter what the obstacle was, and they saw me be a really resilient leader. And I think that shadow was casted, or I know that shadow was casted onto that team because we lived through a lot of uncertain times, especially in the last 3 years of our work together. And I don't think that if I had not been open with them, had I not told my story, had I not, in a safe way, tell your story, had I not done those things, I don't know if we would have had the level of resiliency that we were able to model through the last 3 years in which we worked together.
Yeah, absolutely. And Billy, when I read this, I was a bit surprised. So I'm going to get your take on it. So, yeah, last year they released a study that said between 17 and 18% of today's American workforce is actively disengaged at work, but it also said that there was a variance in manager engagement of about 70%. So why do you think today's modern workforce is so disengaged? And how do you think we can get managers re-engaged in the process of, you know, really giving employee engagement the attention it needs in order to re-engage the workforce? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I think we need to spend more time. I know that we need to spend more time going to root cause. And those stats that you gave out, I can say that they're not surprising to me. And if we go to like root cause, and we'll just kind of go back 6 years ago, and we were living through a pandemic, and we're not designed to live in uncertainty for an extended period of time. And I think COVID taught us that. And so, like, we're all looking for security as human beings. And in this current workforce and climate that we're at, I don't think a lot of us are finding that we are feeling secure, or we're feeling like that we're getting the things that we need. And so there's a lot of things that leaders are ultimately carrying. Not only do I feel in like there's not a lot of security in my work right now, but there's also the pressure of maybe I'm carrying more work. Maybe I'm still responsible for driving like outcomes. I'm still responsible for performance. And so I think you have to like start living in like a reality. And I always say like great leaders live in reality. Like we don't, ignore the reality of the things that are happening outside the doors of the work, and then inside those four walls as well. And I think once we start to acknowledge that and start speaking those things to exist, like this is what I'm feeling, I think it allows leaders, you lose the power. Like when you call and name things, it starts to lose some of that power. And so some of that weight starts to come off of you. So I think it's just important that we just name the things and name what we're all carrying right now and today, and the uncertainty that a lot of us are enduring right now.
Yeah, and Billy, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on the whole idea of community, communication through equity, because I know you've advised senior leaders throughout your career, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on the importance of equity through effective communication, because people have to be authentically heard and listened to in order to make progress too. So I'm wondering your thoughts on equity through effective communication, my friend.
Yeah, I someone once told me early in my career is that we never assume that we know what you're talking about. And so, working with senior management, working with executives, those are certain like rooms and certain conversations that people are having. There's experience that they bring, there's knowledge that they bring that maybe isn't necessarily always afforded to people who are working on our front line or our mid-level managers. And so, when you're talking to people, I think it's important, or I know it's important, that we simplify our words, and we want to make like we don't need to say big grandiose things and try to overwhelm people with our intelligence. I don't think people care how much you know. It's important that they know that you care about them and how you talk to them in a way that they can understand like what is happening and what's going on. I think that's again the word that I've said often here. I think that's a caring way to communicate to people, and not going into conversations assuming that people know what you're talking about. Simplify your language so that your audience can understand what you are saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Billy, as you know, I was told at the age of 9, buddy, that I wouldn't be able to walk for the duration of my life without assistance because of the severity of my cerebral palsy. And I believe that resilience is the answer to the test once adversity strikes. So no matter how high you climb up the corporate ladder, resilience knocks on the door of all of us, my friend. So tell us your thoughts on the importance of resilience as executives and the importance of sort of sprinkling that down to the people that you're in charge of leading, my friend. What are your thoughts on the importance of resilience at work?
Yeah, I believe the most powerful thing that we have as human beings is this choice. So we get to choose like how we react. We get to choose how do we respond to situations. And I loved hearing your story because it reminds me of a choice that you've made. And I think that oftentimes how we see things is how like it shapes our lives. And so we can see problems as that, but what if we looked at like problems as like opportunities? How do I see this as an opportunity for me to think differently? How do I see it as an opportunity to invite other people in to be a part of this solution? I think that helps to create that resiliency that you're getting after. There's also a cautionary tale that I want to just throw out here. I think like we can be as resilient as we possibly can, but I want to remind people that that comes with a cost too. And so like we can keep showing up, we can keep showing up, but be mindful of what that's costing you. And how do you create spaces for you to pull away at times to rest? How do you start to ask for help? How do you acknowledge that like not everything is on you? I've said this often to people. I've not done one great thing by myself. I've always done it in collective community and surrounded by other people who have believed in me, who've offered me chances. Like that's when I do like really great things. So that helps me to be resilient is surrounding myself with like community. So just be mindful is what I would say to folks of like yeah, it's great to be resilient. I think that's how you get to the places that where you want to go, but also be mindful of what it's costing you to. And if it's costing you your genuine like nature of who you are, I don't know if that's worth it. If it's costing you your sanity, if it's costing you the relationships that are most important to you, I just don't know if it's always worth it.
Yeah, and Billy, I've got two questions left for you, my friend. And the first is this: a recent chief executive group survey found that 60% of today's American CEOs now say that training and engagement of their employees is now their top priority. So I'm curious, what do you make of those numbers? And if I had to address a room of 100 new CEOs about the importance of culture alignment and engagement, what do you think you would tell them, my friend?
Yeah, I think it gets back to earlier talking points that we had. If I had to get in front of this group, one of the things I would just say to them, I was like, know who you are, um, know like know what you like. What do you want people to say about you? At the end of the day, so when someone like ends their tenure at your company, like what do you want them to be able to say about their experience there? What do you want to be able to say about the work that they were able to drive? And then what are like simple behaviors that you can do on a day-to-day basis that reinforces that? So you're moving with intentionality. You're not moving with like fingers crossed and hoping that you're going to get there. Every day, like you are putting your foot on this path that ultimately leads you to what you want people to say about you. And so, like, and then how do you like make sure that you're surrounding people who are holding you accountable to that thing and maybe bringing to light and like behaviors in you that you are maybe not aware of and that can help you with like all right like that's not I'm not my behaviors don't align to the environment that I'm trying to cultivate. How do I right ship things? How do I think differently as well as it's going to be important there. So I always say this to people like I'm always fond of people who are moving through life with intention, who are not just grasping at things. They know who they are. They also know who they're not too. So that's how I would speak to this organization. You don't have to be everything to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And, my final question for you, Billy, is about legacy because I know that you spent your career helping organizations align purpose and performance, my friend, with sprinkling the importance of belonging along the way as well. So I'm curious, taking that into account, how do you want your personal and professional legacy to be measured and defined, my friend?
Yeah, as you and I are talking, I know I've said the word a lot. maybe that's kind of the, the theme of our conversation is, I would hope that people would say that I cared. It's really simple. That I cared enough to offer my talents and my gifts, that I cared enough about like how I showed up, that I cared enough like that I cared about those that I had the privilege to lead, and that I cared about the company and its success. That's what I would hope that what people would say about me, professionally and also personally too, especially those first few points that I called out about like I cared about how I show up. I cared enough to offer my time and my talents and my resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And Billy, finally, tell me if people want to continue this conversation with you, my friend. What's the best way they can get connected with all the great work that you're doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm still looking to grow my presence, but the easiest way to connect with me would be via LinkedIn. So happy to join and can continue the conversation there with anyone who would like to have it.
Well, absolutely, my friend. Well, it's always great to see you, and I'm always excited to have conversations about culture, organizational alignment, and resilience. My friend, I want to thank you for engaging in this conversation and all the good work that you've done throughout the course of your career to develop winning cultures of both impact and productivity. My friend, it's always great to see you, and thanks so much for engaging in this conversation, my friend.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kevin. Thanks for the great work that you do, and it's been an honor to spend this time with you having this great discussion.